Welcome to curl 8.10.0, the release presentation. I did a release just a few hours ago, and now I want to talk a little bit about what we did in this release. So yeah, this is me, I'm Daniel. I work for wolfSSL, that's my website, that's my Mastodon account. You can follow me there for weird and fun curl stuff all of the time. Yeah, that's the photo there is my workplace that I'm in at exactly now, but you're seeing my video from the other direction, right? Okay, so this is release 260. It's quite a few releases by now. I've done almost all of them, and I've done them all since we call it curl. So this time we had a participation from 57 contributors, and we had 27 different authors merging or authoring commits that we merged into the Git repository. And in this time we actually had a slightly shorter release window, so it's only 42 days since the previous release, due to how we muck around with the release scheduler a little bit. And the previous release cycle was 1 week longer than normally, and then we did a patch release, so we ate another week out of this release cycle, and now hopefully, ideally, the next cycle will be 8 weeks. Who knows? And this time, the curl 8.8.10.0 release, we have one new security vulnerability to talk about, and I'm going to let you into some details right now. So we call this the OCSP stapling bypass with GNU-TLS. So OCSP stapling is called certificate status request formally. It's a way for a client to ask the server to provide evidence that the certificate it provides has been okayed by the CA recently. Put sort of simplified. So it's a digital sort of timestamp that says it has been verified by the CA recently, so it's still fine. It hasn't been revoked recently. And it is probably not widely supported by servers out there, but there is a whole bunch of servers that support this. And curl supports it. You can just add that search, I think it's -- search status to the command line tool, and it'll then require that you get a positive response back to this request, this status request in the TLS extension. But anyway, if you would use curl built with GNU-TLS, and you would ask to do this, there was this risk that you could get a OCSP stapling response back that's actually said, it didn't say verified, everything is fine, it said unknown, and curl would still treat that as okay and move on and think, hey, everything is good. So a malicious server or a breach server really could then trick curl clients into believing that the certificate is still okay. A little bit of a niche problem, and of course read up on it, and this is again only when you build curl to use GNU-TLS, because it's specific to the particular glue code we have for GNU-TLS. We rate this as a severity medium. It was found by Hiroki Kurosawa, and he gets a reward for this, so thank you. That was the security vulnerability for this time. And we also managed to cram in a whole lot of new things in this release. Actually, by the count that my script counts, actually, it says 16 changes in this release. And 16 changes, that's more changes in a single release than we have ever done in the curl history before. Of course, changes can be big and small, so maybe it's not the biggest release ever still, but the biggest by the volume of counted changes at least. So, for example, we introduced this fun new -- help thing. So you on the curl command line, you do curl -- help and then the command line option, like data, and then you get the full help text for that option in the terminal, and only for that particular option. It's a kind of way to get more to get help easier in the command line when you want to figure out how exactly different option works. It's a little bit of a personal favorite of mine now. We introduced the --skip existing option, which is a way for you to pretty simply skip a download if the target file already exists on disk, without checking anything, if it's the right file, if the file has the right size, right date, anything. It's just, if it's there on disk, you skip it, you skip the transfer. It's been requested numerous times. The -O option with the curl command line tool is now slightly more clever. So if you get, previously when you would do curl -O and a URL that doesn't have a file name, it ends with a slash maybe, curl will just fail and say, hey, there's no file name for me to use when I want to save it locally. Now it tries a little bit harder to decide on a file name to use when downloading such a URL, even if there is no file name in the particular URL. So now it'll try to either use the rightmost directory name and use that as a file name, or it has a default file name to use. If there's no file name and there's no directory in the URL, it'll just use a default file name. So it'll pretty much, succeed more often when you, for example, script this kind of transfer. You can now use the --rate option, also another curl option. So it's --rate is a way to limit the request rate when you do a lot of transfers on the same command line with curl. You can now slow it down, and you can slow it down in a sort of more ways, because now the syntax for it is a little bit, it accepts more, like number of units. Check it out if you use this option. We pretty much renamed the command line option called --include into --show headers. The old one will still work, of course, but --show headers, we think it says a little bit more what it actually does. It basically shows your headers, your response headers, at the same time as your response body when you use a curl command line. Those were things in the curl command line. We still have a few more, by the way. The good old option called dump header. It's called capital D in the short version. It now supports this magic extra option, the % to redirect the output to standard error instead of dumping it to standard out, as it does with if you just type a dash or a minus as a target. Or you can type a file name as well. Another fun thing is that you can now build the curl command line tool with an embedded CA bundle or CA store, which this is useful if you really want to provide perhaps a standalone single curl binary for a user, and without having to read an external file to be able to verify TLS servers. And if you do that, you can use this new command line option called --dump CA embed, which then will output the entire internal CA store to just show you this is the entire thing. The downside with doing it like this is, of course, that then you get a built-in CA store that might over time become outdated, right? So it's harder to update such a CA bundle, because then you pretty much have to update your curl command line again, or you can also ask it to load a certificate file from disk still, of course. The option called -v or --verbose has been a boolean since curl started, pretty much. So you're doing more v's, like -vv or -vvvv has never done anything more previously, even though we know that users believe that and use those options in the sort of expectation that curl would do more things, show more output when you use more v's. And starting in 8.10.0, curl will actually output more with the more number of v's in those combinations, and you have to use them combined, like vvv or vvvv. then it'll add more and more verbosity in the output. Another fun thing that it's for us curl developers is that we now support, if you build curl with a debug version of curl, you get this, you already before had this --test event option. Basically, it makes your curl command line tool use the event-based API internally, which is a way for us to just verify the event-based API, because that's not normally used when you build a normal curl. And now you can use that when you do parallel transfers, and then we use this dependency called libuv, which is more or less an event library. Anyway, if you're developing curl and you want to develop and work more with the event-based API, this is an excellent way for us to just exercise and test curl better manually. Other things we've done, that we added a new curl info option called curl info post transfer time. It's a new timestamp that informs the application when it has completed the entire upload. So if you're uploading something or just sending a request, so you get a timestamp exactly when curl has sent the final byte, which you couldn't do previously exactly. You can now build curl with Windows Unicode with the configure script. We can set the TLS13 ciphers for embed TLS and wolfSSL different TLS backends. We had some changes or fixes for setting the TLS version when you built and ciphers when you build curl to use the Russell's TLS backend. When you ask curl to communicate with HTTP2 prior knowledge and you use a HTTPS URL, curl will no longer ask for HTTP1 because it'll imply that you want HTTP2 and nothing else, which it didn't do before. And we also now support these options as certain SSL key blobs for wolfSSL. Pretty much we're adding support for these options for more backends. And perhaps most important, I don't know if most important, but it's at least a important step, is that the release tarball is now 100% reproducible. And this means that there's we build the script where I build releases on my local machine and I upload them, and now there's a script in the tarball called verify release that if you run that script on a tarball, the script will rebuild that tarball and verify that it ends up the exact same binary copy of the release, which it should do. So by doing that, you verify that everything in the tarball is built with contents in the tarball and with a developer environment, and not anything, magic from my machine or infected from my machine or crazy stuff that I would add that's not part of the release procedure. The idea here is that hopefully someone sometimes at least verify this, so that this would then in theory detect if bad stuff would ever creep into a curl release. Those were the changes. So we did, my script counts 245 bug fixes in those 42 days. So that's a crazy amount. I think it's around 6 bug fixes per day in this release cycle. And some of those I want to mention here. So my favorite 31 bug fixes, quite a large set. So I'll try to not get too hung up about specific details. But anyway, so we fixed a bunch of scripts. So for example, we now detect poll better in when you cross-compile curl. Previously, it would pretty much assume that poll didn't work when you cross-compiled, just to be safe. Now it's a little bit better. And we did a humongous amount of bug fixes and improvements of the CMake builds. So if you build curl with CMake, it should be better. I mean, in almost every respect in this release. We I had this silly regression because a while ago I made it a requirement that the configure script would either find libpsl or it would ask you to explicitly disable PSL so that you wouldn't by mistake build curl without PSL. But it turns out that wasn't the case anymore. Now it is the case again. So if PSL is not found, it'll error out, and you have to either explicitly say it's okay to build without PSL, or you fix the environment so that it finds PSL. PSL being public suffix list, right? It's a it's a list of domains where considered to be public suffix, meant for primarily for cookies in curl. And the run test script, which is the primary script that runs one of our test suites. It has no longer any text awareness. Basically, it doesn't. It has stopped treating Windows environments separately, differently, because on Windows text files and binary files are different, right? But starting now, we have already since before marked text files specifically in the test suite so that it works on Windows as well. And now we don't have to detect the operating systems as text aware anymore. We'll just always check text components differently. So pretty much we increased interoperability really, and it makes it easier to write tests to work on Windows, in particular with different build environments on Windows, because they tend to be challenging sometimes. So we also then I finally fixed so that when curl looks for the curl dot, then the RC file called .curl_rc in most cases is actually without a dot when looking for the file in the xdg config home, or it's on a typical Linux machine it's called .config/curl. In there it should be looked for without a dot, and now I think it does right. Now when you use the curl progress bar that you use with the #sign or hash sign, it's a bar thing that outputs in the terminal when you download with curl or upload. Now when you change the terminal while that progress bar is getting displayed, it'll actually update so that it'll use the new width for the terminal as you change it while it transfers. Previously it would just use the width as detected when the transfer started. And now, for some reason, I had limited the amount of data you could use for posting. For several of the command line options, when you post data, like --data, for example, if you use --data and you use a file name, it'll read that file name into memory before it sends a post. So that was slightly limited in how big files it would accept before. Now it accepts up to 16 gigabytes. And the limit is really just to prevent serious mistakes. If you don't have 16 gigabytes, maybe it'll just fail out of memory instead. But hey, that's not up to me to decide if you want to do that. We fixed a lot of TLS things. So we fixed setting the TLS version. We fixed that in 4 different backends, right? Bear SSL, Embed TLS, Rustls, and Wolf SSL. We fixed the error message when the certificate verification fails. When it fails with these 2 TLS libraries, we improved the error messaging. We fixed new TLS to send more data better in per invoke. So it should, in theory, make TLS sending a little bit faster with GNU TLS. When asking for certificate information from OpenSSL, when that would fail, perhaps because of out of memory in the middle there somewhere, it would actually not fail completely, but could create a half-broken response, which now it doesn't anymore. It either works or fails, so it's more a properly 0 or 1 case as it's supposed to be. Security transport also fixed it. It should have been mentioned on the first line, right? Because it's pretty much the same fix. Fixing the TLS, asking which TLS, the lowest version, the highest version accepted in your handshake. Also, we raised the limit for certificate information that we accept to extract from the X509 parser. I think several of these problems appeared because Debian has shipped curl built with GNU TLS recently, which is a little bit. So I think we have exercised and tested the GNU TLS end of things more than we have done in the past. So we found these things, even though they are not new. Pretty much being able to get larger certificate data back, for example, it's just because we have tested it out against more things on the internet. We fixed end-of-line conversions better for FTP, finally. And we fixed a regression when it comes to doing FTP active mode. When we allow the server to connect back to us, it would we waited for the wrong thing on the socket, so it took a little longer than it had to be because we got a little delay. We have an improved end-of-stream handling with HTTP 2, which makes transfers better in several aspects actually. We can now do non-UTF-8 input when you build curl to use the Apple IDN backend. So IDN, that being international domain names, and if you build curl on Apple operating systems, you can use their native IDN solution, and now you don't have to do UTF input. And we fixed error outputs when you do HTTP 3 with the combination with NGTCP2 and NGHTTP3. We would have the wrong with wrong prefix. Basically, you got error in HTTP3, but it's called the errors. Doesn't matter. It's fixed now. We also fixed a bunch of problems with the POP3 and multi-line responses, which we didn't really handle properly before. So managen, man-gen is a sort of man page generator. So it's a script we have that generates man pages out of it's a script that creates the huge curl.1 man page out of many sub pages, pretty much. We write the sub pages in Markdown, so it'll just generate a huge nroff man page or a text version. And since this cycle, I actually polished the web version of that displays the man page, and I noticed a few quirks in the output that I fixed in the script. So now, for example, it removes a superfluous leading blank line in quoted sections, which appears as examples and everything on the web page. I also made sure that we removed the leading space from examples, which also improved the web version mostly, because I also changed the background on the example section, so that's why they became apparent to me suddenly. And when I did this new help option, right, that I mentioned, curl -- help and a command line option, so that it displays the option, the help in your terminal, then I realized that some of our example lines in the text version of the man page could end up very long and wrap around when you have a narrow terminal, or even some cases even when you don't have a narrow terminal. Basically, the example lines could end up really long, and now we word wrap them in the produced text version of the man page, which makes nicer text version man pages, also visible with curl -- manual. And there's also then a maximum width in general for the text version, so it word wraps nicer, pretty much. We fixed a silly flaw that made us sometimes, when we would do happy eyeballs to connect to servers, we would actually try IPv4 first and then IPv6 in an unexpected way, which we shouldn't. We should always try IPv6 first. That's the idea with happy eyeballs. We fixed another flaw with the AWS SIG v4 authentication. It's a complicated authentication, but we fixed another problem with it. We fixed the keep alive, TCP keep alive for Windows. I don't remember exactly which versions of Windows because I think there's some cutoff. But anyway, we were wrong with a factor of 1,000 when we set the time. So I think we set it 1,000 times too long. So it's basically had no effect. But now we do it correctly. We cleaned up the random number generator or extracting function in curl so that it's now more clear to users, or at least to authors, how we provide random numbers. And we only build curl with a weak random number generator if absolutely necessary, which in most cases it isn't. In most cases we use the TLS library's crypto library to bring back cryptographically safe random numbers when we need random numbers, which improves a lot of things in curl. We had this silly regression in the previous release, so we did the SIG pipe ignore wrong, so that we could sometimes not ignore the SIG pipe even though we were supposed to. So your application or your application could end up getting a SIG pipe signal from the socket that curl was using, even though we make an effort to make make sure that doesn't happen. And now it shouldn't happen again, back to how it's supposed to be. We fixed the connection reuse case for HTTP2 upgrades. HTTP2 upgrades, that's when we upgrade a clear text HTTP1 connection from 1 to 2, right? But there's a short time gap there before when it is HTTP1 until it becomes HTTP2. How to handle connection reuse in that time gap, and we had a little mistake there. Now it's fixed. We had a silly bug in when the URL API you can set a host name. You can parse a URL and then update the host name part in that URL, and that's how it's supposed to be. That's how the URL IP has worked since a long time. But if you would set a name and you would use a URL encoded name and you would use % blah 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 blah, which is perfectly fine, curl would reject that and say, hey, % is not a legal character in a host name, and that's correct. But we verified it URL encoded, so the verification was wrong when it's supposed to actually verify the hostname after it has been decoded. Now it does that. We have stopped using the getAddrInfo XW on Windows. And what is this, you may ask, and why? So a while ago, a couple of releases ago, not too many, maybe 3-4 releases, we switched the default curl build on Windows to, instead of using the threaded resolver, it would use this asynchronous resolver called in a certain range of Windows versions, because then we don't have to create new threads, but we would use this. Well, possibly Windows makes threads on its own internally anyway, but we wouldn't have to manage those threads. It would be less resource intensive for us and pretty much a leaner thing. But it turns out this is, I would say, not a working API in Windows. So we basically ran into snag after snag after snag after problem, and there are use cases where we simply cannot do this without ending up in a crash. So we can't use this call safely in curl on Windows without risking running into crashes. So we have reverted that, and we erased that code from curl, and we're back to the previous separate helper thread for name resolving on Windows, exactly as we do it on all other operating systems, pretty much by default. Yeah, those were the bug fixes I wanted to mention this time. There were, of course, about 210 other bug fixes too. You can read about them on the changelog. So I want to highlight in particular this time that in February 2025, when's that? in about a half a year or so, we will remove support for the hyper dependency. And hyper, we use that as an alternative HTTP1 backend today, but we will remove support for it in 2025, in February then, or maybe after February. Because we have, because no one really uses it, no one really works on it, and the work on it has stalled. We don't see any future for hyper in curl. So unless someone steps up, yells a lot, we will remove it. But I want to emphasize that we are mentioning this here now also as a way for someone to actually object. So if you actually have plans, ideas, thoughts, come to us and talk about it. And another thing that we intend to remove in May 2025, that's a few months later, right? We intend to drop support for all TLS libraries that don't support TLS 1.3, and all libraries there too, the bare SSL and the secure transport TLS libraries. So we intend to drop support for them in May 2025. So if this is a concern for you, either yell at the mailing list or start planning for migrating away from these TLS libraries when you build curl. The next curl release is likely to become 8.11.0 unless we have a terrible regression in this release, because if we do, we will do a patch release. And some of the things that possibly might come in the next release, I don't know, but these are at least things that we have on the agenda, sort of pull requests that are brewing, cooking in the on GitHub. So you can go there, look at them, test them, comment, and bring your own. Right, so we have this TLS 1.3 early data work. So I'm not sure if it's mature and ready quite yet, but it's coming. And TLS 1.3 early data is, of course, a way to send data earlier in the TLS handshake. So reducing round trip, sending data earlier in the handshake so that we can gain time, pretty much. There's this option to disable WebSockets autopong, which I think is on track to get merged. WebSockets might, in general, become marked not experimental, I think, in the next release. So I think that might be one of the bigger things too. I forgot to add it as a special bullet point here, but still. So if you use WebSocket with curl, now it's a good time for you to tell us how it works and what's not working, and we should fix it as soon as we can. And we have this interesting PR that then allows a user to send only a part of that dash data. And why is that fun? Well, that's mostly fun if you, for example, you have a huge file on disk and you only want to send a portion of that in a HTTP post, for example. And there's an interesting PR for support for doing quick in the Linux kernel. I'm not sure this is ready yet either, but it's a fun project. And the companion project here is that they have not merged or got it accepted, the kernel module part. But if done so, I think and only when that happens, this will be more interesting, right? Because then a huge part of the quick protocol would be able to get done in kernel, and only a part of it would be done in user space and then in, for example, curl. And I wanted to mention that we did TrueRel version 0.15 release a few weeks ago, so you should just go, and it's a companion tool for curl, of course, that parses and manipulates URLs. There will be a follow-up release soon as well. And the next release is likely to happen on November 5, and you can go to this page to see the always updated pending coming release notes that we plan to do for that particular release, because it's updated automatically. And the next one is going to become, ideally, hopefully, an 8-week release cycle. And this is today, release Wednesday. And then this starts the 10-day cool down period after a release. We need some time to see that And this is a time to allow everyone to report regressions, right? If you find problems in this release, submit them as soon as you can, and we work on them. And if we deem them important enough, we will do a patch release within this 10-day cooldown period. And then after 10 days, that the plan is to, on that Saturday, we open the 21 days feature window, in which we allow merging features, changes, which we then close on the Saturday, and then we have 25 days of feature freeze until we do a release Wednesday again. And then we go round and round and round, right? And that's the September 11 today. September 21, we open the feature window. On October 13, we close it. And then on November 5, we do the next release. So that's the release cycle. Next step, planning. Let's cross our fingers and hope that we don't have to do any patch release before that. I work for wolfSSL. We do curl support. That's pretty much how I fund and how I do curl work all day. I work on curl full time, thanks to customers paying for support. If you find suspect typos, issues, problems, things are not doing, things are not working the way you want it to do, or you're supposed it should do, or whatever, submit an issue. There's also a discussion forum there if you want to discuss anything, suggest new things, just ask for help, whatever. If you suspect, find a security problem, submit it on hackerone.com/curl, because we want to keep it private until we have fixed it, right? And then announce it responsibly to the world. So we better not tell the world before we have fixed it. We have a bug bounty program there, right? So you can get a substantial amount of US dollars if we deem your security report accurate and correct. The top sponsors of September, even though this had this title says July, it's the same set of top sponsors this time as we've had the last couple of releases, and they are our best friends, of course. That's what I wanted to say this time around. This is curl 8.10.0. Fun seeing you. See you again in another release. Bye.